Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I used to think the phrase, long-term survival shelter, was marketing fluff, a brochure word, a thing for people with money and paranoia, not something you'd ever actually need. I'm not a paranoid person by nature. I'm the kind of person who checks the torque on a bolt because the spec sheet says to, not because I'm afraid the world is ending. My name is Noah Keller. I'm 36 years old, and before everything broke, I was a building systems engineer in Kansas City. That means I spent most of my working life in mechanical rooms, on rooftops, and in unfinished basements, making sure air moved the way it should, water went where it should, and power didn't do anything surprising. I did commissioning on new construction, retrofits on old office towers, and the occasional emergency call when a hospital's backup system got temperamental at the worst possible time. The outbreak didn't start with screams in the street. It started with a normal Tuesday that had a weird edge to it. On Tuesday, March 12th, I woke up at 6:10 a.m. to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen was a chain of notifications I didn't understand yet. A city alert about public safety, a news app pushing a headline about unusual violence at a suburban urgent care, and a text from my supervisor that simply said, "Do not come to the office, stand by." I lay there for a moment, listening. The apartment building was quiet in that early way, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the far-off sound of traffic. Nothing about the room told me the day would be different. Then I heard sirens, not one or two, a steady, layered howl, like the city had decided to turn itself inside out. I rolled out of bed and went to the window. From the 7th floor, I could see part of Interstate 70 in the distance. Traffic was already thick and it was moving wrong, too fast, too close. A few cars had stopped on the shoulder with hazard lights blinking like nervous eyes. My neighbor across the hall, a nurse named Melissa, opened her door at the same time I did. She had her hair in a rough bun and her scrub top half tucked in, like she dressed while walking. "You hearing this?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "You going in?" She shook her head and held up her phone. "They told us not to. They said the emergency department is locked down. Nobody in. Nobody out." That was the first moment the ordinary rules started to bend. Hospitals do not lock down unless something is very wrong. Melissa didn't wait for my reply. She walked back into her apartment and came out with a backpack, a water bottle clipped to the side, and a look that told me she'd already made decisions I hadn't. "Get water," she said. "Fill everything you've got. If they're locking down hospitals, it's not just a weather thing." I nodded, because my brain liked the shape of a clear task. I filled the bathtub and every pot I owned. I topped off my 2 plastic jugs under the sink. I started charging everything, even the old power bank I barely used. I turned on the radio because the radio doesn't buffer or crash or spin a loading icon when networks get overloaded. The voices on the AM station were tense and too careful. The host kept saying unconfirmed reports and please stay calm, which is how you know people aren't calm. Around 8 a.m., the first real video hit my phone. It wasn't a news clip. It was someone's shaky recording from inside a pharmacy. The camera pointed at the floor, then up, then caught a glimpse of a man with a torn jacket moving with a stiff, purposeful shuffle. A woman screamed. Someone knocked over a display of cough drops. The camera spun, and the last thing you saw was a set of hands grabbing at someone's shoulder with an insistence that wasn't normal. No blood, no dramatic movie stuff, just frantic motion, hard breathing, and that awful certainty that the person filming wanted to be anywhere else. The comments under the video multiplied faster than I could read them. Some called it staged, some called it drugs, some called it rabies. A few called it what I didn't want to call it. By noon, the mayor's office held a press conference. The city emergency management director stood behind a podium with a pale face, and a voice that tried to sound like it had slept. "There is an ongoing public safety incident involving aggressive behavior," she said. "We are coordinating with state and federal partners. We are asking residents to remain indoors. Avoid unnecessary travel. If you are currently at home, stay home. Aggressive behavior. That's what you call it when you don't have language for what's happening, or you have language for it and you're afraid people will panic if you use it." I spent the afternoon in my apartment, checking the window, checking the hallway, checking my phone, like that would create control. At 3:40 p.m., the power flickered. It came back immediately, but it was enough to snap my attention into a different place. Power doesn't flicker in the middle of a sunny day unless something is wrong in the grid. A car into a pole, a substation event, a load imbalance because everyone just turned on everything at once, or because someone is no longer doing their job. At 4:15 p.m., the building's management company sent an email. I read it 3 times, not because it was complicated, but because the words didn't fit in my mind. Due to current events, building staff will not be on site until further notice. Elevators may be shut down if conditions worsen. Please secure your unit. Please conserve water. If the staff wasn't coming back, then trash would pile up, pipes would fail, and the building would become a vertical problem. I understood buildings. They were not meant to be unattended. At 6:20 p.m., Melissa knocked on my door. When I opened it, she looked like she'd run a marathon in place. "I need to leave," she said. "I have family out west. My sister has a place near Salina. Farm, well water, solar. I can't stay in a building with 100 people and 1 stairwell." I leaned against the doorframe. "Roads are already a mess." "Not yet out west," she said. "Not like here. I'm leaving tonight." I should have asked if I could go with her. I should have said yes immediately, but my brain did what it always did. It tried to calculate. "How are you getting there?" I asked. "Car," she said, like that was obvious. "I have half a tank." I looked past her into the hallway. A couple doors were open. Voices were raised. A baby was crying somewhere. The building was a pressure cooker beginning to heat. "I have tools," I said, "and water, and I can help." Melissa studied me for a moment. "Then come," she said, "because if you wait until tomorrow, the roads won't be open." I went back inside and moved with a speed I didn't know I had. I threw clothes into a duffel bag. I grabbed my work backpack with a headlamp, multi-tool, gloves, a roll of electrical tape, and a small meter I used for checking voltage and continuity. I took the 2 liters of water I could carry without hating myself. I took my first aid kit because it was better to have it than to wish. I opened my closet and looked at the locked case at the bottom. I owned a firearm the way some people own a fire extinguisher. Not as a hobby, not as a personality, but because I believed in redundancy. It was a plain, legal, boring 9mm handgun, and I had taken the safety class that came with it. I had a small safe. I had a box of ammunition that I never expected to use for anything more than the occasional range day. My hands felt foreign as I opened the case. I checked it the way the instructor had drilled into me. I placed it in a discreet bag, not in my waistband like I was pretending to be someone else. I grabbed the spare magazine and the lock, because habits matter when your head is full of static. When I stepped back into the hallway, the air smelled different. Not bad, not yet. Just human. Too many bodies, too much breath, too much fear. We took the stairs down because the elevators were a gamble and the lobby was chaos. People argued with the security desk, as if an unarmed guard could conjure stability. Someone demanded to know why the doors were locked. Someone else yelled that the doors should stay locked. Those 2 sentences crashed into each other like cars in slow motion. Melissa and I slipped out through a side exit that required a key fob. The air outside was cold and bright. The sky looked indifferent. Her car was a silver Subaru with a dent in the rear bumper. She popped the hatch and shoved her backpack inside. The street had more cars than usual, and the movement felt nervous, like everyone was trying to decide whether to commit to leaving. We pulled out and headed toward Interstate 35, aiming to get west before the city's problems spread like spilled ink. At first, it was just heavy traffic. Then it became something else. Near downtown, we passed an intersection where a city bus sat at an angle, its front wheels on the curb. The driver's door was open, no driver. A handful of people stood in the street, clustered around something I couldn't see, their heads bent close like they were looking at a phone screen. Melissa didn't slow. "Don't look," she said, and I didn't, because my instincts finally agreed with her. We got onto the interstate at 8:05 p.m. The on-ramp was crowded, but moving. The lights of the city smeared behind us in the mirrors. For about 20 minutes, it felt like escape. Then a sedan ahead of us swerved hard, clipped the guardrail, and spun. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was metal scraping metal, a shower of sparks, a sickening wobble. The car stopped sideways, blocking 2 lanes. Brake lights flared everywhere. Horns shouted, cars backed up, trapped by their own commitment to the road. Melissa gripped the wheel. "We're getting off," she said. "What?" I asked, because the off-ramp was still ahead, and the line behind us was already tightening. "We're getting off," she repeated, "because if we sit here, we become part of this." She forced the car into the shoulder, bouncing over the rumble strip. Another driver followed, then another, like a school of fish reacting to a shadow. We crawled along the shoulder, passing the spun sedan. As we did, I saw the driver's side door hanging open. I saw the driver standing on the pavement, swaying slightly, not looking at the wreck, not waving for help. He turned his head toward our car as we passed. His face was slack and pale, like he'd forgotten how expressions worked. Melissa's eyes stayed forward. "No," she whispered, as if saying it could make the world listen. We reached the off-ramp and took it. The surface streets were less crowded, but the mood was worse. People were stopped in parking lots, arguing, pointing at their phones, making plans in public like privacy still existed. Melissa drove west on smaller highways, trying to stay away from major interchanges. I watched the roadside signs and called out directions. This was something I could do. Navigation was logic, and logic was a rope I could hold onto. Around 10:30 p.m., we stopped at a gas station outside Lawrence. The lights were on, but the place looked picked over. A couple pumps were dead, paper signs taped to them that said "out." The convenience store door had a crack in it. Melissa pulled into a spot near the entrance. "In and out," she said. We stepped out, and the night air had a sharpness to it. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. 2 men stood near the door, scanning the parking lot like they were waiting for trouble. Inside, shelves were half empty. The clerk looked like he'd been awake for 2 days. His eyes flicked to my bag, then away. Melissa grabbed bottled water, a couple protein bars, and whatever medical supplies were left. I went for fuel additives out of habit, then remembered that this wasn't a job site. I grabbed a map from the rack, the kind nobody bought anymore, because paper doesn't need signal. At the counter, a woman pushed past us, holding a bag of chips and a pack of batteries. Her hands shook. "They said it's spreading," she told the clerk, as if the clerk was in charge of the universe. "They said it's in St. Louis." The clerk didn't answer. He just rang her up with a numb efficiency. Back in the car, Melissa started the engine and froze. "What?" I asked. She pointed through the windshield. Across the parking lot, near the edge of the light, someone stood beside a dumpster. They were still, not rummaging, not smoking, just standing. Then, slowly, they stepped forward into the light. Their clothes were torn and dirty. Their posture was wrong in a way I couldn't put into words, like the joints weren't cooperating. A man near the door noticed them and took a step back. "Hey," he called. "You okay?" The figure didn't answer. It kept walking. Melissa put the car in gear. The man called again, louder. "Stop!" The figure didn't stop. I watched the man's body language change. He raised his hands, palms out, like he was dealing with an unstable dog. Then the figure surged forward, faster than it should have been able to. The man stumbled back, and the figure collided with him. The man yelled, a sharp, raw sound. Melissa hit the gas. The Subaru shot out of the parking space, the tires chirping. We swung wide around the pumps, and for a moment I saw people spilling out of the store, drawn by the noise. A second figure appeared near the dumpster, then a third. I didn't wait to see what happened next. We got back onto the road, and the darkness beyond the station felt like a safer place than the light. We drove until after midnight. The traffic thinned the farther west we went. The radio stations became quiet, then turned into static, then into the lonely hum of nothing useful. Melissa's plan was Selena, her sister's farm, a place with space and water and fewer strangers. It was a good plan, but plans rely on roads, and roads rely on other people behaving predictably. Around 1:40 a.m., outside a small town I didn't catch the name of, we hit a roadblock that wasn't official. 2 pickup trucks were parked across the highway, hazards blinking. Men stood beside them with flashlights. One waved us down, stepping into the lane. Melissa slowed, but her posture stayed rigid. "This is not good," she said. "Maybe they're warning people," I said, even though I didn't believe it. The man approached the driver's side window. He was wearing a camo jacket and a baseball cap. His face looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Roads closed," he said. "Why?" Melissa asked. "Accident," he said quickly. "Further up. You need to turn around." Melissa kept her voice calm. "We came from the east. There was an accident back there too. We're trying to get to Selena." The man's gaze flicked over the car, over our bags, over me. "Selena's not safe," he said. "Nothing's safe. You got food, water?" Melissa's jaw tightened. "We have enough." The man leaned closer. "We're trying to keep people from driving into trouble. If you want to pass, you gotta contribute. That's the deal." There it was, the new rule. Pay the toll or go back into the dark. Melissa's hand dropped toward the center console, not to a weapon, just to the gear shift, like she was deciding. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my hands visible. "We can give you a couple bottles of water," I said, "and a first aid kit." His eyes brightened. "That'd work." Melissa glanced at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded because water and a first aid kit were cheaper than conflict. We handed over 2 bottles and the small kit. The man took them and stepped back. One of his friends moved the pickup just enough to create a gap. Melissa drove through without meeting his eyes. We didn't talk for a long time after that. The silence was heavy with the understanding that the world had developed new economies overnight. By dawn, the sky turned grey-blue, and the flat Kansas landscape stretched out like a sheet. Grain silos, windbreaks of leafless trees, fences that ran straight until they vanished. At 7:15 a.m., Melissa's phone buzzed with a call. She answered on speaker. A woman's voice came through, tight and urgent. "Mel, where are you?" "On Highway 10, Melissa said. "Westbound. We're—" "Don't come," the woman interrupted. "Don't come here." Melissa's hands tightened on the wheel. "What happened?" "It happened here too," her sister said. "It's in town. They shut the roads. People are—" Her voice broke. "We had to lock the house. Dad has the tractor blocking the drive. There were people at the gate last night, just standing there, not talking. Just standing." Melissa's face went pale. "I'm almost there." "Mel?" her sister said, and the way she said her name sounded like a warning siren. "You can't get in. They blocked the county road. They're stopping cars. I don't know who they are anymore." Melissa swallowed. "What do you want me to do?" There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard the sound of breathing and something else in the background, maybe a dog barking, maybe people shouting, hard to tell. "I want you alive," her sister said. "I want you to find somewhere you can lock down, somewhere with water, somewhere you can control." Melissa's eyes flicked to me, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was thinking: control. My mind went to concrete and steel, to sealed doors, to filtration, to redundancy. And then, like a file opening in my brain, I remembered a conversation from a project meeting 6 months earlier. We'd been commissioning a data center expansion, and one of the subcontractors had been talking about these crazy condo bunkers in Kansas. luxury units built inside an old missile silo. He joked that if things ever went bad, he knew where he was going. At the time, I'd laughed politely and gone back to checking airflow readings. Now, the memory felt like a flare in the dark. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I might know something." She ended the call with her sister in a rush of "I love you" and "stay inside." Then she looked at me. "What do you know?" I pulled the paper map from the glove box and spread it on my knees. My hands were steadier than I expected. "There's a place," I said, "near Topeka, or near there. An old Atlas missile silo that got converted. It's called the Survival Condo Project. It's real. People bought units like apartments underground." Melissa stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. "That's a real thing?" "Yes," I said. "I don't know exactly where it is without looking it up, but it's in Kansas, and it's built for long-term living. Deep underground, concrete, steel, air filtration, water storage, power generation." She looked back at the road ahead. The horizon shimmered slightly as the sun rose, painting the fields with gold that felt undeserved. "We're heading west," she said. "Topeka is east." "I know," I said, "but Selena isn't an option. And whatever's happening is spreading along the highways. A place like that, it's designed to keep people out." Melissa exhaled, a shaky breath. "Designed for rich people. Designed for survival," I said. "And right now, I don't care why it exists. I care that it does." She drove in silence for another mile, then signaled and took the next exit. The Subaru rolled onto an empty frontage road, and for the first time since we left the city, we stopped moving. Melissa put the car in park and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. "My sister told me to find somewhere I can control," she said. Her voice was small. "A farm is only control until you run out of hands and luck." I didn't interrupt. She lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were red but clear. "If we go to this place," she said, "and it's locked or full or already compromised, we're burning daylight for nothing." "I know," I said, "but if it's real and accessible, it could be the one place that makes sense." Melissa nodded once, like she'd just signed a contract with reality. "Then we go," she said, "but we do it smart. No stopping unless we have to." We turned around and headed back east. Going against the flow felt like swimming upstream. Most cars were still moving west, away from the cities. But there were more stopped vehicles now, more abandoned ones, more evidence that the infrastructure was starting to choke. We avoided the interstate whenever possible, using state highways and back roads. Kansas is a grid if you understand it. County roads laid out in mile squares, with gravel stretches and narrow bridges over drainage channels. At 11:30 a.m., we passed a small town where smoke rose from behind the water tower. We didn't stop. At 12:15 p.m., we saw a line of cars parked in front of a grocery store, people moving like ants, carrying what they could. We didn't stop. At 1:05 p.m., we came upon a sheriff's cruiser parked at an intersection, its lights flashing. The deputies stood in the road, waving cars away from a bridge. Melissa slowed and I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "What's going on?" I asked. The deputy's face was sweaty and strained. His uniform looked rumpled. "Bridge is closed," he said. "We're trying to keep traffic from piling up in town. Go south and take County Road 47. "Is it safe?" Melissa asked. The deputy's eyes flicked to her, then to me. "Nowhere's safe," he said, "but don't go into town. And if you see anyone acting wrong, don't stop." He didn't use the words either. He didn't have to. We took the detour. The road turned to gravel. The Subaru rattled, dust billowing behind us. The fields were quiet except for the occasional crow perched on a fence post, watching. By late afternoon, the sky had that hazy look it gets when the wind is calm and everything feels like it's waiting. We reached the outskirts of Topeka around 4:40 p.m. The city looked like a place holding its breath. Traffic lights still worked at some intersections, dead at others. A few businesses were shuttered. A few had people in the windows. Everyone was watching everyone else. We didn't go into the center. We skirted the edges, using the map and whatever signal our phones could still scrape together. Melissa's phone managed to load a cached page with the survival condo's general area and a mention of an address, something rural, south of Topeka, out where the roads were thin and the land was wide. We drove in that direction, and my heart hammered in a way that didn't match the calm of the countryside. If this was a wild goose chase, it could get us trapped. If it wasn't, it could still get us trapped, just differently. At 6:05 p.m., we turned onto a county road that ran between open fields. The sun was low, turning the landscape into long shadows. The road was empty, which should have been comforting, but instead felt like a warning. Then I saw it. A tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A set of cameras on poles angled outward. And beyond that, a concrete structure that looked like a utilitarian farm building if you didn't know what you were looking at. No windows, thick doors, a shape that didn't belong out here. Melissa slowed the car. "Is that it?" I stared, my mouth dry. "I think so." We approached a gate set back from the road, a keypad, a call box, a sign that said private property, no trespassing, surveillance in use. Melissa parked on the shoulder, keeping the car pointed toward the road, which she was ready to flee. We sat there for a moment, listening. The air was quiet, no birds, no wind, just the faint ticking of the engine cooling. "How do we do this?" she asked. "We don't ram the gate," I said, because the image had flashed through my mind, and I hated that it had. "We try the call box, we talk, we look for signs of activity, lights, generator exhaust, anything." Melissa nodded, and we both got out. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we walked toward the gate. I kept my hands visible. I wasn't trying to look threatening. I was trying to look like a human being. I didn't know if that mattered anymore. Melissa pressed the call button. A small speaker crackled. For a second, I thought nothing would happen. Then a voice came through, male, calm, slightly distorted by the intercom. "State your name." Melissa blinked. "Melissa Hart," she said. "This is Noah Keller. We're looking for shelter. We're trying to get somewhere safe." There was a pause. I imagined someone watching us from a camera feed, evaluating our posture, our bags, our expressions. "This is private property," the voice said. "I know," I said, stepping closer. "I know what this place is. I know it's a survival facility. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here because the roads are collapsing and—" "Hold," the voice said. The intercom went silent. Melissa looked at me, eyes wide. "They answered," she whispered, like she couldn't believe it. "Yeah," I said softly. My throat felt tight. "That's a good sign." We waited. A minute passed, then two. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement behind the fence. Someone approaching on an interior road. A vehicle, a dark SUV, moving slow. It stopped near the gate. A man stepped out, and even from a distance I could tell he wasn't casual. He wore a plain jacket, jeans, and boots, but his posture was alert. He had a radio clipped to his collar. He wasn't pointing anything at us, but he carried himself like someone who had made peace with hard decisions. He walked to the gate and studied us through the mesh. "You're not residents," he said. "No," Melissa replied. "We're not." "Then why are you here?" I took a breath. "Because this is the only place I can think of that was built to keep people alive when systems fail," I said. "And systems are failing." The man's expression didn't change. "What do you do?" It was a strange question until I realized it wasn't. In a world where money might stop meaning anything, useful people became currency. "I'm a building systems engineer," I said. "Mechanical and electrical commissioning. I can keep generators running. I can troubleshoot pumps. I can maintain air handling systems and filtration. I can work with power distribution and controls." Melissa swallowed. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Emergency and trauma. I can do wound care, infection control, medications. The man held up a hand. Stop, he said, not unkindly. I'm not asking for a resume. I'm asking because if we open this gate for you, you become our problem. I nodded. Fair. He looked at our car. Are you alone? Yes, Melissa said. The man reached up and tapped his radio. Control, I have 2 at the gate, he said. 1 building systems, 1 nurse. No visible injuries, no obvious issues. He listened, then nodded slightly to himself. Here's how this works, he said, looking back at us. We do not bring unknown people inside without screening. We have procedures. You follow them exactly. If you don't like them, you leave and we lock the gate behind you. I understand, I said. The man's eyes stayed on me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether I looked like someone who could follow rules under pressure. Then he nodded once. I'm Grant, he said. I handle external security. You're going to park your car in the intake area. You will not come past the second fence until you're cleared. Do you have weapons? Melissa hesitated, and I answered. Yes, I said. A legally owned handgun, secured. We're not looking for trouble. Grant's gaze didn't flicker. You'll surrender it for storage while you're screened, he said. If you pass, we'll talk about policy. I felt the instinctive resistance, my brain wanting to cling to anything that made me feel less exposed. Then I remembered the roadblock men, the highway chaos, the fact that I was standing at someone else's gate. Okay, I said, whatever you need. Grant punched a code into the keypad. The gate motor whined and the metal swung inward. The sound of that gate opening felt like stepping across a border into a different kind of world. We drove through slowly, the SUV leading us down an interior gravel road toward a secondary fence. The property was bigger than it looked from the road, with a wide perimeter and clear sightlines, like someone had planned for exactly this scenario. The intake area was a concrete pad with painted lines, floodlights mounted on poles, and a small building that looked like a checkpoint. A second gate shut behind us with a heavy clank. Grant gestured for us to get out and stand in marked squares on the concrete. There were cameras everywhere, motion sensors, a loudspeaker mounted high. Hands visible, Grant said. Do not approach me. Do not approach the building until instructed. We did what he said. Another person appeared at the checkpoint door, a woman in coveralls, wearing gloves and a clear face shield. She carried a clipboard and moved with deliberate calm. I'm Dana, she said through the shield. Medical screening. You're going to answer questions and then you're going to be decontaminated. No exceptions. Melissa's shoulders sagged in a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Okay, she said. Dana asked about bites, scratches, fevers, confusion, recent exposure. Her questions were clinical and fast, like she'd practiced them. Melissa answered with a nurse's precision. I answered with the honesty of someone who knew lies wouldn't work in a place like this. Dana had us check our own bodies first, then she visually inspected from a distance, directing us to turn, lift sleeves, show hands. She never came within arm's reach until she was satisfied. Grant watched the entire time, his stance ready. Then came the surrender. I set my handgun, still secured on a stainless steel table under a camera. Grant used a long plastic tool to slide it into a lockbox without touching it directly, then sealed it. The ritual was oddly comforting. Procedures, steps, clear boundaries. Dana handed us each a sealed plastic bag and pointed to a door labelled airlock. Inside, she said, you will strip down and place all clothing and items into the bags. You will shower. You will put on the provided garments. You will not open the interior door until instructed. Melissa blinked. All clothing? All, Dana said. If you have anything you want to keep, you tell me now. Otherwise, it gets treated and stored until clearance. I looked at Melissa. She nodded once, jaw set, and we went into the airlock. The airlock room was bright, sterile, and tiled like a locker room built by someone who cared about contamination. 2 benches, hooks on the wall, a drain in the floor, a stainless steel shower stall with multiple nozzles, and a control panel that looked industrial. I stripped, bagged my clothes, and tried not to think about how vulnerable the human body is without fabric and pockets and the small illusion of armor. The shower water was hot and smelled faintly of disinfectant. I scrubbed until my skin felt raw, not because Dana told me to, but because my brain needed the sensation of doing something against what was happening out there. When we finished, we put on the provided garments, plain grey sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt, thick socks, rubber sandals, no belts, no strings, controlled clothing. A speaker crackled overhead. "Stand by," a voice said. "Interior door will open in 30 seconds. Melissa and I stood side by side, dripping slightly, our bags of items sealed and labelled through a small pass-through window. The interior door hissed as it unlocked. Grant met us on the other side, along with another man who looked older, with a clipped beard and the expression of someone who had lived with contingency plans for a long time. "I'm Malcolm Price," the older man said, "operations lead. You're here because you claim you can contribute. That is the only reason the gate opened." I nodded. "Understood." Malcolm gestured down a corridor. "Welcome to the intake level," he said. "You will be quarantined for observation. If you show signs of infection or instability, you will be isolated. If you pass, we'll discuss integration. If you don't, you leave." Melissa's voice was steady. "How long is observation?" 72 hours, Malcolm said. "Minimum." He led us down the corridor, and as we walked, I felt the air change. It was cooler, filtered, and dry. The hum I heard wasn't city noise. It was mechanical, fans, pumps, the steady heartbeat of infrastructure. We passed through another door, then another. Each had a keypad and a camera. Each made a solid, satisfying seal when it closed. Finally, Malcolm brought us to a small suite with 2 bunks, a table, a sink, and a bathroom with a real toilet, not the chemical one. The walls were painted concrete, clean and thick. The door had a window of reinforced glass. "This is your quarantine," Malcolm said. "Food will be delivered through the pass-through. You have a radio to contact intake staff. Do not attempt to leave this room. Do not damage property. Do not test doors." He looked at me. "You're Noah Keller?" "Yes." "You said you can keep systems running," he said. "If you're cleared, you will work. We're running on diesel generators and battery storage. We have water wells and stored potable reserves. We have air filtration and pressure control. And we have people who think a bunker runs itself. It doesn't." My mouth was dry. "I know," I said. Malcolm nodded once, almost like approval. Then he looked at Melissa. "And you're Melissa Hart?" "Yes. We have a clinic," he said. "We have supplies. We also have a limited staff. If you're cleared, you will work." Melissa's chin lifted. "I'm not here to be carried." Malcolm's expression softened slightly, just for a moment. "Good," he said. "Then rest. Observation begins now." The door closed, and for the first time since the day began, I was somewhere that felt like it had edges. Melissa sat on one of the bunks and let out a long breath that sounded like she'd been holding in it for hours. "We're inside," she whispered. I sat on the other bunk and listened to the air. The fan hum was steady, not strained. The temperature was controlled. The lights were bright and stable, not flickering. It felt like being inside a machine designed to ignore the outside world. And for a moment, that machine felt like salvation. But salvation is never free. It's always paid for with rules, labor, and the kind of choices you don't want to make until you have no option. Over the next 3 days, Melissa and I lived in quarantine like ghosts. Food came in sealed trays. Water was measured. Dana checked us twice a day through the window, asking questions, scanning our faces for signs of fever or confusion. I watched my hands obsessively, looking for tremors. I watched Melissa's eyes, looking for the kind of dullness that would mean she was slipping. We talked quietly at night when the bunker's noise settled into a lower hum. "What do you think is happening out there?" she asked on the first night, sitting at the small table with her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like it had been rationed. I think, I said carefully, whatever it is, it spreads fast, and it breaks systems because systems depend on people. Melissa nodded. Hospitals got hit first, she said. Not because they were weak, because everyone ran to them. Everyone brought the problem to the same place. That's how networks collapse, I said. Load concentrates until something snaps. On the second day, the bunker shook slightly. Just a faint vibration, like a heavy truck passing nearby. I froze, listening. Melissa looked at me. What was that? Could be a generator load shift, I said. Could be a door seal test. Could be something outside. We sat in silence, and in that silence, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself. Even underground, we were not truly separate. The outside still existed. It could still reach us if enough pressure built. On the third day, Malcolm came to the quarantine door with Dana and Grant. Observation complete, Malcolm said through the glass. Vitals stable. No signs of infection. You will be cleared into level 2. The phrase level 2 carried weight, like a passport stamp. The door unlocked, and we stepped out into the corridor wearing clean bunker clothes that didn't smell like fear and exhaust. Malcolm led us deeper. The survival condo wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a vertical complex built inside a former Atlas missile silo, reinforced and reimagined. The main shaft ran down like a concrete spine, with levels branching off: mechanical, storage, habitation, recreation, medical, command. We walked past a mechanical room with thick doors and warning signs. Through a window, I saw industrial air handling units lined up in a row, their housings clean and labelled. I saw ductwork wrapped in insulation, pressure gauges, filter banks, and the thick pipes of a chilled water loop. My engineer brain lit up with recognition and, weirdly, comfort. Machines I understood. Machines followed rules. Malcolm stopped at a balcony that overlooked the central shaft. From there, I could see multiple levels stacked below, like the cross-section of a ship. Lights glowed warm against grey concrete. People moved along walkways, carrying crates, checking panels, talking in small groups. How many people are here? Melissa asked. 37 residents, Malcolm said. 12 staff, and now 2 more. Capacity, I asked. Malcolm's mouth tightened. Designed for more, he said. But design doesn't mean stocked for more. We have reserves for the current population for about 18 months with strict rationing, assuming systems hold, and we can maintain supply chains through controlled runs. Without runs, time shrinks. I looked down into the shaft, the depth making my stomach tighten slightly. Controlled runs, I repeated. Supply missions, Grant said from behind us. Fuel, parts, medical supplies, food. We do not do it often. We do it carefully. My mind immediately went to diesel. Fuel is life in a bunker. Generators need it. Vehicles need it. Some systems might be able to stretch with batteries and solar if they had surface arrays. But underground, you live on stored energy and conversion. Malcolm gestured toward a stairwell. Noah, he said, you're coming with me. Melissa, Dana will take you to the clinic. Melissa looked at me, a question in her eyes. I'll see you, I said. She nodded and followed Dana down a corridor. Malcolm led me into the mechanical level. The smell hit me first. Oil, warm metal, and the faint tang of treated water. It smelled like every plant room I'd ever been in, except cleaner, newer, more intentional. The generator room was behind a thick door with sound insulation. Inside, 2 large diesel generator sets sat on concrete pads, each with vibration isolators. They were industrial grade, not the little portable ones people keep in garages. These were meant to run buildings. A third unit sat idle, covered with a tarp. What are they? I asked automatically. 2,000 kilowatt units, Malcolm said, and a third for redundancy. We run one at a time under normal load. We cycle for maintenance. We use battery banks to smooth peaks. We do not have endless fuel. I walked closer. reading labels, looking for obvious issues. The units were clean, maintained. A day-old logbook sat on a clipboard with neat handwriting. "You have good people," I said. "We have a few," Malcolm replied. "But we lost one tech on the second day. He went out on a run with Grant's team and didn't come back. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. His eyes held that grief in a way that told me it was contained behind a wall of necessity." Malcolm pointed to a control panel. "We're seeing occasional voltage instability on the load transfer," he said. "And we're burning more fuel than projected. Either our load assumptions were wrong or something is inefficient." I nodded, my mind already running down the checklist. "I want to see your load profiles," I said. "I want to see your power factor. I want to see your battery bank behavior. And I want to check your air handling. Fan power can quietly eat fuel if filters are loading up or dampers are mispositioned." Malcolm's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's the first time in 3 days anyone has said power factor down here," he said. "Good." He walked me to the electrical distribution room, where switchgear stood like a lineup of armoured cabinets. Each panel was labelled, each breaker organised. Emergency lighting, critical loads, non-critical loads. It was a well-designed system. I ran my fingers along the edge of a cabinet without touching anything live. "Who installed this?" I asked. "Contractors," Malcolm said. "Before my time. The people who built this were smart. The people living in it assumed smart meant self-sustaining forever." I looked at him. "Nothing is forever," I said. Malcolm's expression was grim. "Exactly," he said. "So we make it as long as we can." Over the next week, I became part of the bunker's rhythm. I learned the layout, the habitation level with condo doors that looked like apartment entrances, each leading to a private unit built into the circular wall of the silo. The common area with a kitchen and dining space. The gym that nobody used at first because stress burns calories without moving. The hydroponics room, where racks of greens grew under bright lights. The water treatment section, where well water was filtered, treated, and stored in tanks. The water system was impressive. They had a deep well with a submersible pump, a pressure tank, sediment filtration, activated carbon, and ultraviolet disinfection. They had stored potable reserves in large tanks, marked with fill dates and treatment cycles. They had a grey water system that fed non-potable uses and a sewage handling system that was more advanced than most people's homes. But it was still a system. It still relied on pumps, seals, sensors, and parts that wear out. Every morning, I walked the mechanical level with a checklist I wrote myself: generator oil levels, coolant, fuel polishing system status, transfer switch logs, battery bank voltages, inverter temperatures, air handling unit static pressures, filter differential readings, damper actuator positions, carbon filter status, water treatment pump run times, pressure readings, tank levels. It wasn't glamorous. It was life support. Melissa settled into the clinic like she'd always been there. The clinic had exam tables, cabinets of supplies, a small pharmacy stock, and a quarantine room separate from intake. She organised the medications, checked expiration dates, and instituted hygiene protocols that some residents resisted because they wanted comfort, not discipline. I saw her sometimes in the common area, her hair pulled back, her posture straighter than it had been on the road. She looked like someone who had found something solid to stand on. But the bunker wasn't just machines and medicine, it was people. And people brought their own failures underground. There was a man named Robert who owned one of the larger units. He'd made his money in tech and liked to remind everyone of it. He complained about rationing. He complained about rules. He complained that the internet didn't work. "This place was supposed to be self-sufficient," he said one night at dinner, waving a fork like a pointer. "We paid for a guarantee." Malcolm's voice stayed calm. "You paid for a structure," he said, "not a guarantee." Robert scoffed. "Then why are we doing runs? If it's truly designed, we shouldn't need to risk exposure." Grant's jaw tightened. "We need diesel," he said. We need filters. We need medication. You can't stock infinite everything. Robert leaned back. Then maybe we should bring in more people, he said. More hands, more skills. The room went quiet. Melissa set her cup down carefully. More people is more risk, she said. More mouths is more demand. And you can't screen forever if the outside gets worse. Robert looked at her like she was being dramatic. We can handle it, he said. We have walls. I watched the exchange and felt something sour in my stomach. People loved walls because walls felt like a solution. But walls are only a solution if the inside is stable. Malcolm ended the conversation with a simple, final tone. This is not a democracy right now, he said. This is a survival operation. Runs happen because they must. New intake happens only when we can control it. Robert didn't like that. I could see it in the way his mouth tightened, the way his eyes narrowed. And I understood something else. The bunker was strong, but it was not immune to internal fracture. The first major test came on day 11. It was 2:20 a.m. when my radio crackled with Malcolm's voice. Noah, mechanical level, now. I was up and dressed in 60 seconds. When you live inside a system, you learn to respect the sound of urgency. I jogged down the stairwell to the mechanical level, the air cooler as I descended. The corridor lights were steady. That was good. Malcolm met me outside the generator room. His face was tight. We lost generator 1, he said. My heart dropped. Shut down. Auto trip, he said. Overheat alarm. It shut itself down and transferred load to generator 2. We're stable, but we can't afford to run hot and burn through redundancy. I nodded, already thinking. Overheat could be coolant loss, fan failure, blocked radiator, thermostat issue, sensor fault, or load beyond design causing high exhaust temperature. In a bunker, heat rejection is everything. You can have a generator that runs perfectly in open air and struggles underground if ventilation or exhaust is compromised. I stepped into the generator room. The idle unit was still warm, fans quiet. The room itself was slightly hotter than usual. Smell anything? I asked. Malcolm shook his head. No smoke, no fluid on the floor, just the alarm. I went straight to the control panel and pulled the fault log. The display showed a coolant temperature spike. I checked the coolant reservoir level. It was within range. I checked the belt-driven fan assembly and the motorized louvers that controlled airflow. I checked the exhaust routing. Then I looked at the ventilation damper position indicator. It was partially closed. That's not right, I said. Malcolm leaned in. It was open earlier. I moved to the damper actuator and checked the linkage. It wasn't broken. It wasn't jammed. It looked like it had received a signal to close. Do you have automation tied to temperature control in this room? I asked. Yes, Malcolm said. We modulate based on intake temperature and exhaust sensor feedback. Then either the sensor is lying, I said, or something told it to close, or someone did. Malcolm's eyes hardened. No one has access down here without me or Grant. I didn't argue. I just did what I do. I tested. I pulled out my meter and checked the actuator control voltage. It was receiving a command. I traced the control wiring back to the local panel. The panel's indicator lights suggested it thought the room was too cold, which would explain the damper closing. Your temperature sensor is reading low, I said. That's impossible, Malcolm said. It's warm in here. Exactly, I replied. So either the sensor failed or it's been manipulated. I found the sensor mounted near an intake duct. It was a simple, rugged probe, the type used in industrial controls. I touched it gently. It was cool, too cool. I leaned closer and realized why. A small bag of ice had been taped to the sensor housing. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. It was so absurd, so human, so unnecessary. Then anger flared hot and sharp. Someone did this, I said, my voice low. Malcolm stared at the ice like it was an insult. Why? I thought of Robert complaining about noise and fuel use and guarantees. I thought of people wanting comfort over discipline. Because they wanted the dampers to close, I said. to reduce ventilation noise, or to change temperature, or because they thought they were smarter than the system. Malcolm's jaw clenched. "Remove it," he said. I tore the tape off and pulled the bag away. The sensor quickly warmed. The panel indicators shifted as the control system recognized reality. The dampers began to open. "Generator 1 overheated because it couldn't breathe," I said. "It shut down to protect itself. It did the right thing. Someone tried to make the room do what they wanted, and the machine refused." Malcolm's face was stone. "Who?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "But you have a sabotage problem." The word hung in the air. Malcolm keyed his radio. "Grant," he said, voice controlled but dangerous. "Security review, now. Someone interfered with mechanical ventilation. Treat as deliberate." Grant's reply came instantly. "Copy." I went through the rest of the generator, checking for damage. The overheat trip had likely prevented catastrophic harm, but we'd need to inspect coolant system integrity, check oil for thermal stress, and run the unit under load after a cool down to confirm it was stable. Maintenance cycles mattered. As I worked, I felt something shift in me. The bunker wasn't just threatened by the outside. It was threatened by the same thing that collapses every system: people who refuse to respect constraints. That morning, Malcolm called a meeting in the common area. Everyone came, drawn by the tone of urgency and the simple fact that there was nowhere else to go. Malcolm stood at the front, Grant beside him, Dana and Melissa off to one side. I stood near the back, arms crossed, listening. "We had an incident," Malcolm said. "Someone interfered with generator ventilation controls. That interference caused an automatic shutdown. We lost redundancy for several hours. We were one failure away from losing power stability." Murmurs rippled through the room. Robert's hand shot up. "Are you saying someone tried to sabotage the generators?" "I'm saying someone taped ice to a temperature sensor to force a damper to close," Malcolm said. "That is not an accident." A woman named Elaine spoke up. "Why would anyone do that?" Grant's voice cut in. "Because they wanted something and didn't care about consequences." Robert looked around, eyes wide with performative shock. "This is insane," he said. "We need to find who did it." "We will," Malcolm said. "And until we do, access to mechanical levels is restricted to staff only. Additionally, all residents will comply with updated security checks. No exceptions." Robert's face tightened. "You can't treat us like criminals," he said. "We paid." Malcolm's gaze pinned him. "Paying ended when the world ended," he said. "Now we have responsibility. If you cannot live under rules, you can request removal." The room went dead quiet. No one requested removal. No one wanted to step back outside. After the meeting, Grant pulled me aside. "You found it," he said quietly. "Anything else down there?" "Not yet," I said. "But if someone is willing to tamper with life support systems for comfort, you need to assume they'll do other things." Grant nodded, grim. "We're checking cameras," he said. "But you know how it is. Blind spots. People know where they are." I did know. Every security system has edges. Every system has assumptions. And assumptions are where failures hide. That afternoon, Melissa found me in the corridor outside the water treatment room. "Dana told me what happened," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "Someone played games." Melissa's eyes were tired. "People are scared," she said. "Scared people do irrational things." "I get fear," I said. "I don't get messing with ventilation on a generator room." Melissa looked at me for a long moment. "Noah," she said softly, "this place is full of people who bought certainty. They don't know how to live without it." I stared at the door label, water treatment. "Then they're going to learn," I said. The next crisis came from outside. On day 15, Grant returned from a supply run with 3 people in tow. I watched from the observation window in intake as the newcomers stood in the marked squares. A father, a mother, and a teenage boy. Their clothes were dusty. Their faces were drawn. They looked like they had been running from something for a long time. Grant's team was tense. One member had a fresh scratch on his forearm, already cleaned and covered. Dana did her screening with the same disciplined calm. The family answered questions, showed skin, complied. No visible injuries, no fever. Malcolm watched with a hard expression. "Why did you bring them?" he asked Grant through the intercom. Grant's voice was controlled. "They were at the perimeter," he said. "They found the fence. They didn't try to climb. They used the call box. They said the boy has asthma and they have medication, but their inhaler is running out. They have skills. The father's an electrician. The mother's a teacher." Malcolm's jaw worked. "We have protocols," he said. Grant replied, "They followed them, and they're not leaving, not willingly. If we turn them away, they'll camp outside the fence. They'll draw attention." I felt the cold logic of that statement. A bunker is hidden until it isn't. People outside become a beacon. A beacon attracts more people. More people attract chaos. Malcolm looked at Dana. "Screen them," he said. "Full quarantine." Dana nodded. Melissa stood beside Dana, her face unreadable. She caught my eye through the glass and gave a tiny nod, like she was acknowledging the reality of what this meant. More people, more risk, more moral weight. The family went into quarantine. The intake procedures held. But the presence of new people rippled through the bunker like a vibration. Residents whispered. Robert complained again, louder now, about resources being wasted and letting strangers in. Elaine argued back, saying, "We can't become monsters." Someone else muttered that monsters was a useless word now. I kept my head down and did my checks, but I felt the tension accumulating. It reminded me of pressure in a pipe system. Fine, until a valve sticks and suddenly the weakest joint fails. On day 18, the perimeter alarm sounded. It wasn't a subtle noise. It was a deep, pulsing tone that vibrated through the concrete. My radio crackled. "All staff to stations," Grant's voice said. "Perimeter breach attempt at Sector 3. I ran toward the command level, where monitors displayed camera feeds. Malcolm was already there, eyes on the screens. Grant stood at the center, headset on, directing people with short commands. On the monitor, I saw the fence line at Sector 3, a group of figures clustered near the chain link, pressing close. Not a massive crowd, but enough to be dangerous. 10, maybe 15. They moved strangely, not like a coordinated mob, more like people drawn to a sound. Then I saw one of them slam into the fence repeatedly, shoulders and head hitting metal with relentless persistence. A guard on the interior side raised a loudspeaker. "Back away from the fence," the guard shouted. The figures didn't respond. Grant's jaw tightened. "They're attracted to vibration," he muttered. "Or light." "Or both," Malcolm said. The figures pressed closer. The fence bowed slightly. "Do we have secondary barriers?" I asked, because my mind went to physical systems again. Grant looked at me briefly. "Earthburn behind the fence," he said, "and we have deterrents." He keyed his radio. "Activate perimeter deterrent," he said. A second later, the floodlights along the fence line flared brighter, and a harsh sound burst from speakers mounted on poles. Not music, not words. A piercing, oscillating tone designed to repel. The figures reacted. Some recoiled, some flinched, some pressed in anyway, like their brains couldn't process discomfort properly. One of them stumbled back and fell, then got up again with a stiff determination. "They don't care," Melissa said quietly beside me. She'd come up to command too, her face pale. "They care less than normal people," I replied. "Different thresholds, different processing." The deterrent tone continued, and slowly, too slowly, the cluster began to thin. A few wandered away, drawn by something else. A few remained, bumping the fence like moths against glass. Grant didn't relax. "They found us," he said. "That's the problem. Not this group. The fact they're here at all." Malcolm's gaze stayed fixed on the monitor. "We assumed rural meant hidden," he said. "Assumptions again." Grant turned slightly. "We need to reduce our surface signature," he said. "Lights, noise, heat. Anything that gives us away. My mind went straight to generator exhaust and heat rejection. Your exhaust stacks, I said. They'll plume in cold air, visible, and the generator room ventilation might be audible out there. Malcolm nodded once. Then we adapt, he said. Noah, I want mitigation options. I swallowed. We can baffle vents, I said. Reduce noise. We can adjust exhaust routing and mufflers if we have spare materials. We can reduce non-critical loads so we run less. We can push more into battery at night, but heat has to go somewhere. Malcolm looked at me with hard appreciation. Do it, he said. That night, while the bunker stayed quiet under restricted lighting, I sat with schematics and a notepad, sketching possible changes. I was back in my element, except my element now included the fact that failure meant more than inconvenience. Failure meant dark corridors, dead pumps, stale air. In the days that followed, we did what humans do best when forced. We organized. Grant reorganized perimeter patrol schedules and tightened gate protocols. Malcolm implemented new rules about noise and lighting. Dana and Melissa tightened health screening further, adding mental status checks because infection wasn't the only threat. Panic could make people dangerous too. And I worked the systems harder than ever, optimizing, balancing, stretching. I reduced power waste by adjusting ventilation schedules, ensuring we weren't over-ventilating unoccupied areas. I worked with Malcolm to enforce temperature set points that were safe but not luxurious. I cleaned filter pre-screens and documented pressure differentials. I taught 2 residents who had mechanical backgrounds how to do basic checks without touching critical controls. For a few weeks, it almost felt stable. Then the internal fracture finally revealed itself. It happened on day 31, in the quiet hours before dawn. I was in the electrical room, checking an inverter temperature reading that had been trending higher than expected, when my radio hissed. "Grant to Noah," Grant said, voice clipped. "Report to intake, now." The way he said it made my stomach sink. I arrived at intake to find Grant standing near the airlock door, Dana beside him, face shield on. Malcolm stood slightly behind, expression hard, and Robert was there, sitting on the bench inside the intake room, hands cuffed in front of him with plastic restraints. His face was red with anger and humiliation. "What is this?" I asked. Grant's eyes met mine. "We found who tampered with the generator ventilation," he said. "And we found more." Robert barked a laugh. "This is insane," he said. "You're all losing it down here." Grant ignored him. "We reviewed camera footage," he said. "We found him accessing mechanical level through a service corridor during a shift change. We found him placing the ice. We also found him attempting to access the fuel polishing control cabinet tonight." My mouth went dry. Fuel polishing was the system that kept diesel clean and usable over time by filtering out water and particulates. If you ruin that, you shorten your fuel life dramatically. "Why?" Malcolm asked Robert, voice low. Robert's eyes flashed. "Because you're turning this place into a prison," he snapped. "Because you're hoarding control. Because you're rationing like we're in a war zone." "We are," Grant said flatly. Robert leaned forward as far as the restraints allowed. "I paid for comfort," he said. "I paid for autonomy, and you're acting like you own us." Malcolm's expression didn't change. "You tried to interfere with fuel systems," he said. "That is not a complaint. That is a threat." Robert's jaw worked. "I was going to fix it," he said quickly. "You people don't understand the system. You're wasting fuel. I was going to adjust." "No," I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out harsh. "You don't adjust fuel systems because you're annoyed. You don't touch life support because you're uncomfortable. You don't get to gamble with everyone's survival because you're used to buying your way out of discomfort." Robert glared at me. "And who are you?" he demanded. "A mechanic? A nobody?" I felt my face heat. "I'm the person keeping the lights on," I said. "And you tried to turn those lights into your personal mood lighting." Dana's voice was cold. "Enough," she said. "This isn't about pride. This is about safety. Malcolm looked at Grant. What's the recommendation? He asked. Grant's jaw tightened. Removal, he said. The word hit the room like a physical object. Robert's face went pale. You can't, he whispered. You can't send me out there. Malcolm's eyes were unreadable. You sent yourself, he said, when you decided your comfort mattered more than everyone else. Robert's voice rose. I'll behave, he said desperately. I'll follow rules. I'll work. Grant shook his head. We can't risk you, he said. Not after this. Robert turned his pleading gaze toward me, as if I had some authority that could rewrite the decision. Noah, he said, voice shaking, tell them we can work this out. I felt something twist in my chest. Not pity exactly. Something worse. The recognition that this was a human being facing the outside world again. But then I pictured the generator room overheating. I pictured the bunker dark. I pictured people trapped without air movement. I pictured Melissa in the clinic with no power for refrigeration, no lights, no equipment. And I pictured Robert with his hands on a control cabinet, thinking he was the smartest person in the room. I met his eyes. You made choices, I said quietly. And choices have consequences now. Robert's shoulders slumped. Please, he whispered. Malcolm's voice was steady, like a man reciting a procedure he hated. We will not execute anyone, he said, as if he'd anticipated the direction fear could go. We will not harm you. We will provide a pack with food and water. We will return your stored weapon if you are cleared to carry it. We will escort you to the perimeter and release you. Robert laughed, a broken sound. That's a death sentence, he said. Grant's voice was hard. No, he said. It's a chance, more than you gave us. They did it at noon, when visibility was highest. The bunker went into restricted movement as Grant's team escorted Robert through intake, through decontamination, and out to the exterior gate. I watched through a camera feed in command, my stomach tight. Robert wore a pack. He held his weapon in a case. He looked smaller than he had in the dining area, stripped of his complaints and entitlement, reduced to a man standing on gravel under an open sky. Grant spoke to him briefly, pointing toward the county road. Robert nodded like he wasn't really listening. Then the gate opened, and he stepped out. The gate closed behind him with finality. For a long time, the camera showed Robert standing there, staring back at the fence like he expected it to reopen. Then he turned and walked away. Melissa stood beside me in command, arms wrapped around herself. I hate this, she murmured. I know, I said. She looked at me. Do you think he'll make it? I stared at the screen until Robert became a small figure in the distance. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know we couldn't keep him. Melissa nodded slowly, tears in her eyes that she didn't let fall. The outside changed, she said, and the inside has to change too. Yes, I said, or it won't survive. After Robert's removal, the bunker became quieter. Not because people were calmer, but because they understood something that hadn't fully landed before. The bunker was not a hotel. It was a ship in a storm. A mutiny would sink everyone. Work became the language of belonging. People volunteered for hydroponics. They took turns in the kitchen. They cleaned common areas. They followed hygiene protocols with less complaint. Some did it out of fear. Some did it out of genuine adaptation. The family in quarantine was cleared and integrated. The father, an electrician named Luis, became my second set of hands in the electrical room. He was steady, practical, and grateful in a way that made me ache. His son, Mateo, used his inhaler carefully, rationing puffs under Melissa's guidance. Melissa found ways to extend medication life, tracking every dose, adjusting activity levels, watching triggers like a hawk. The mother, Teresa, organized a small school-like routine for the younger residents because structure was medicine too. Weeks passed, months blurred. Outside, we learned what we could from radio signals. Sometimes we caught emergency broadcasts from distant cities. Sometimes we caught amateur radio operators calling into the void. Sometimes we heard nothing but static. Grant's runs became less frequent as fuel and risk calculations tightened. When they did go out, they moved like a professional team, quiet, fast, focused. They brought back diesel from rural co-ops, filters from industrial suppliers, medical stock from clinics that had been abandoned. Every run was a gamble. Every return was a relief. We had close calls. A run team once returned with a vehicle door dented and a story they didn't fully tell. Another time, they came back empty-handed, faces drawn, and Grant's eyes had that distant look again. But the bunker held, and I learned what long-term survival really meant. It wasn't just concrete and steel. It wasn't just generators and wells. It wasn't even filtration and hydroponics, though those mattered. Long-term survival was discipline. It was social cohesion. It was deciding every day to do the unglamorous work of keeping systems stable. It was also accepting that safety wasn't a permanent state. It was something you built and rebuilt. On day 103, Malcolm called me into his office. His office was a small room on the command level, with a desk bolted to the floor and maps pinned to the wall. It smelled faintly of coffee and paper. He gestured for me to sit. "Noah," he said, "you've become critical here." I felt uncomfortable with the word. "I'm just doing my job," I said. Malcolm nodded. "Your job keeps the place alive," he said, "and I'm not going to pretend that isn't power." I frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Malcolm replied, "that leadership has to be resilient too. Grant handles security. Dana handles medical. I handle operations. But if something happens to me, we need continuity." My stomach tightened. "You want me to take on more authority," I said. "I want you to be ready," Malcolm said. "Not because you're special, because you're reliable." I stared at the desk. Reliable. That was a word I could live with. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a function. "What do you need?" I asked. Malcolm slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed schematics, checklists, and a list of codes and procedures. "Learn everything," he said. "Not just mechanical. All of it, because long-term survival means redundancy and leadership too." I took the folder, feeling its weight like a physical responsibility. That night, I sat with Melissa in the common area after dinner. The lights dimmed to conserve power. The hum of the bunker felt like a lullaby now, familiar and constant. Melissa watched me flip through the folder. "He asked you," she said. "He did," I replied. She studied my face. "How do you feel?" I thought about the gate opening, about Robert walking away, about the fence line alarm, about the ice on the sensor, about the fact that the bunker was still alive because people did their jobs and followed rules. "I feel," I said slowly, "like we're not just hiding anymore. We're building something." Melissa's mouth tightened in a faint, tired smile. "A new normal," she said. "Maybe," I said, "or at least a controlled environment." She leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "Do you ever think about the outside?" she asked softly. "Every day," I said. "Do you think it will ever settle?" she asked. I didn't have an answer that would make the world kinder, so I gave her the truth I had. "I think," I said, "the outside will keep changing, and if we want to survive long term, we can't pretend this bunker is a pause button. It's a platform, a base, a place to keep knowledge and skills alive until we can do something with them." Melissa turned her head toward me. "Do something like what?" I looked down the corridor, toward the sealed doors, toward the concrete that separated us from the sky. "Like reclaim," I said. "Carefully, slowly, with planning, with rules." Melissa was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once, like she'd just accepted another hard truth. "Then we work," she said, and that became our answer to everything. When the air filters loaded up, we changed them, cleaned what we could, tracked pressure and performance, and adjusted flow rates to stretch life. When the hydroponics pump started cavitating, we shut it down, cleared the intake, and rebalanced the nutrient loop. When the battery bank's capacity began to degrade, we tested cells, adjusted charging profiles, and reduced peak loads so we didn't stress the system. When people got anxious, Melissa and Dana gave them structure, routines, tasks, hygiene, small comforts that didn't cost much energy but brought stability. When the perimeter drew attention, Grant refined signature reduction, baffles, light discipline, movement schedules, and patrol patterns that minimized noise and vibration. We didn't win, not in a movie sense. We endured. 6 months after the day the city sirens started, I stood at the intake observation window and watched a sunrise through the exterior camera feed. The sky above the Kansas fields was a thin band of orange, fragile and beautiful in a way that didn't feel poetic, just real. I remembered my apartment building in Kansas City, the hallway full of voices and fear, the staff email that said they weren't coming back, the flicker of power at 3:40 p.m. like a warning. I remembered Melissa's voice telling me to fill the bathtub. I remembered the gas station outside Lawrence, the figures stepping into the light. I remembered the gate opening here, and the sound it made as it swung inward. And I understood, finally, what long-term survival meant. It meant you don't just survive one night. You survive the 1,000 small failures that try to stack up into a collapse. You survive the temptation to take shortcuts. You survive the arguments, the fatigue, the grief. You survive the part of yourself that wants to believe someone else will fix it. No one else was coming. So we became the ones who fixed it. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass, not because I thought I could touch the outside through it, but because the gesture grounded me in the fact that there was still a world out there, and one day we'd have to meet it again. Behind me, the bunker hummed, steady and alive. For now, the systems held. For now, we did too. But because the gesture grounded me in the fact that there was still a world out there, and one day we'd have to meet it again. Behind me, the bunker hummed, steady and alive. For now, the systems held. For now, we did too. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.